Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Penn Vicarage on this nice but somewhat wet and windy Thursday morning. I hope you are well and cheerful and looking forward to a good day with the Lord today. Now, one of the things that's always bemused me about St Bart's Church, which I love, as you know, we have some rather peculiar windows. I mean, as you know, for many, many years, before people could read especially, what the church used to do was put biblical stories in the windows of churches. And we've got them in St Bart's. I have to say, some of them are perfectly valid biblical stories, but are just a bit peculiar. Like above the fonts, you've got the death of Joseph in the Old Testament. It's in the Bible, but it's a bit of a strange one. You've got Abraham with his knife. Not very politically correct, that one, but nonetheless, it's there. But the most peculiar one is the one that's over the sound desk at the back of church. It's in the Bible. In fact, it's in this morning's reading. It's actually the healing of somebody called Dorcas. So what I'll do in a minute is when I've done this, I'll put a picture of the stained glass window on Facebook for you, so you can look at it as well. But have a look next time you're in. It's one of the stories in this morning's reading. So with that in mind, without further ado, let's move to the morning's reading this today. We're working our way through the Acts of the Apostles. Now, as I'm sure you know, the Christian gospel started principally from Jerusalem and it spread. And the last couple of chapters, we had this guy, Saul, who hated the Christians, or hated the people that followed Jesus, and sought to persecute it. And in the last chapter, we have him meeting Jesus on the Damascus Road, and basically becoming a Christian, and then going to Damascus. And as I said, that took place over it was about 3 years or so in Damascus. So what we're going to do, what happens with this reading this morning, is we kind of park Saul over there in Damascus for his 3 years, getting himself sorted out, and doing what Saul has to do. We come back to Peter again this morning. And I'm reading Acts chapter 9, and I'm starting to read at verse 32. Now, as Peter went here and there among all the believers, he came down also to the saints living at Lydda. There he found a man named Aeneas, who had been bedridden for 8 years, for he was paralysed. Peter said to him, "Aeneas, Jesus Christ heals you. Get up and make your bed." And immediately he got up. And all the residents of Lydda and Sharon saw him and turned to the Lord. Now in Joppa there was a disciple whose name was Tabitha, which in Greek is Dorcas. She was devoted to good works and acts of charity. At that time she became ill and died. When they'd washed her, they laid her in a room upstairs. Since Lydda was near Joppa, the disciples, who had heard that Peter was there, sent 2 men to him with the request, "Please come to us without delay." So Peter got up and went with them. And when he arrived, they took him to the room upstairs. All the widows stood beside him, weeping and showing tunics and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was with them. Peter put all of them outside. Then he knelt and prayed. He turned to the body and said, "Tabitha, get up." Then she opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He gave her his hand and helped her up. Then calling the saints and widows, he showed her to be alive. This became known throughout Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. Meanwhile, he stayed in Joppa for some time with a certain Simon, a tanner. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, fascinating. A couple of things I think Luke particularly wants us to see from this. Firstly, this, that Peter was doing the sort of things that Jesus did. Let me show you what I mean. Do you not think it's interesting that Peter met a paralysed man and he told him to get up and make his bed? Does that not remind us of the time when Jesus met a paralysed man on a pallet and Jesus said to the paralysed man, "Get up, take up your bed and go home"? I think we're meant to see a parallel there. And likewise, and this is really one for you, he brought back from the dead this woman called Tabitha. And the word he used was Tabitha Koum, which means Tabitha, get up. And for those of you who know the story well, does Tabitha Koum not sound remarkably like Talitha Koum, which is what Jesus said to the daughter of Jairus, that girl who died when he met her in the Gospels? And so, in a sense, I think we're supposed to see a parallel between him healing Tabitha and bringing her back from the dead, and saying Tabitha Koum as opposed to Talitha Koum with the girl in the Jairus' daughter. I think we're meant to see, you see, that as Jesus healed a paralysed man, Peter healed a paralysed man. And as Jesus healed someone with those words, actually Peter healed someone with very similar words. What I'm trying to say is, I think we're meant to see that the disciples were doing things that Jesus did. And I think it tells us that we, as I said yesterday, we are the body of Christ. And we as the church, we as God's people, continue Christ's work on earth today. We are the body of Christ. We continue Christ's work today. The other thing I think which Luke wants us to do through the whole of Acts and the whole of Luke's gospel, is the way that the gospel is spreading. And look in the 2 or 3 chapters, chapters 7, 8, 9, look what happens. You have persecution, and so Philip goes and spreads them. People spread, and people Philip, and they spread it in Samaria, which is in the north. So it's response to persecution, the gospel goes to the north. You have people in Damascus that Saul goes to see. In other words, you see the gospel's being spread to the east. Philip meets the Ethiopian eunuch. Where's he going? South. And here, in the reading this morning, we have what happens towards the west, because Lydda and Joppa, which is nowadays Jaffa, Jaffa Cakes, as I was coaching with, is towards the east, towards the west. So what I think he wants you to see is that the gospel is spreading north, south, east, and west. In other words, the gospel is spreading. And even though the disciples are being persecuted, even though there were many troubles, the gospel of Jesus Christ spread remorselessly. And I suppose I want us to know today that the gospel is still spreading today. That in the words of the old hymn, God is working his purpose out. And as I said yesterday, the Lord works in mysterious ways. God often works through ways which are not the conventional way, and perhaps not the way we'd have done it. But whatever happens, the gospel of Jesus Christ spreads. And I think he wants you to see this morning that in these chapters, you have the gospel of Jesus Christ being spread to the north, the south, the east, and today we find it to the west, into the Mediterranean, and so on. And so, my friends, I hope you have a lovely day. And remember today that we are the body of Christ. What we do, we are doing Jesus, we are Jesus on earth. And also know that the gospel of Jesus Christ spreads. And however things we may be told things are, and whatever we may hear, the gospel of Jesus Christ will always spread, because Jesus is Lord, King of Kings, and his message and his gospel will spread. It happened then, north,